There you go.
There we
There
go.
you go. So we will post the video of this in the Belmont Pan-Asian Coalition Facebook group. I'm pleased to welcome authors Marie Myung-ok Lee and Ed Lin tonight to discuss their coming-of-age novels, Finding My Voice, and David Tung Can't Have a Girlfriend Until He Gets into an Ivy League College. Marie teaches creative writing at Columbia University and is the writer-in-residence at the Center for the Study of Race and Ethnicity. Her young adult novel, Finding My Voice, is widely thought to be the first contemporarily set Asian American novel, and it has recently been re-released. She is a co-founder of the Asian American Writers Workshop. Ed is a native New Yorker of Taiwanese and Chinese descent. He is the first author to win 3 Asian American Literary Awards. David Tung Can't Have a Girlfriend Until He Gets into an Ivy League College. His first YA novel, young adult novel, was published by Kaya Press in October 2020. Ed lives in Brooklyn with his wife, actress Cindy Chung, and son. It's wonderful to have you both together here, as your books are so personal, both ring so true, and they describe very different complementary worlds. The protagonist of Finding My Voice, Ellen Sung, lives in a mostly white town in Minnesota in the 1980s. Ed Lin's protagonist, David Tung, lives in contemporary New Jersey in a majority Asian town. So Belmont, just to give you a little context, is kind of in the middle ground between these two extremes, with a 17% Asian population, a little bit more so in the schools, as Ed was noting earlier. So I think that readers here will recognize elements of both worlds. And as you know, Belmont has had some recent racial incidents, one involving an Asian middle schooler, so it's particularly timely to be highlighting stories about Asian American teenagers tonight. So first, I wanted to thank you both for writing these books, because when we were growing up, there was no such thing as Asian American YA. So I just wanted to start off, I don't know if you each want to give a little elevator pitch about your books, and then we can dive into some questions. Marie, do you want to tell us a little bit about those?
What I'm going to do, and shout out to Dr. Wu. This novel is really, really good. So
Thank you.
There's that. And in my elevator pitch is going to be a little bit that I'll admit up front that this, the character grew up in an all-white town and had really strict parents. And I grew up in an all-white town in actually Hibbing, Minnesota, which is where Bob Dylan is from. And he just had his 80th birthday. So he's been in the news. Probably for the younger people, won't really know who he is, but he's actually this huge cultural figure who also felt very stifled in our small town and left as soon as he could. So I'll just read a little bit, and then, because I don't really, it's hard to give an elevator pitch for your own book, because you kind of feel like, I wrote all these words and I need all of them. Okay. So I'll just read a little bit, and then we can kind of go from there.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's called Finding My Voice, partly also because, again, as Dr. Wood was talking about, we didn't have YA literature, and the only thing I ever saw with an Asian person in it was Farewell to Manzanar, which was actually not written by an Asian American. It was a memoir, and her husband wrote it. And so sometimes you just have to make what you want to see if it's not there. So that's kind of how I wrote this. And it's just very heartwarming for me to see that there's been enough interest in it that it's coming out again. And so I'm feeling really happy, but also a little sad that it's so relevant in both good and bad ways. So, okay. I'm just going to read for a couple minutes from the first chapter. Moo. It is still dark when I reach to shut off the Holstein-shaped alarm clock that my best friend Jessie gave me for my 16th birthday. To shut it off, you have to pull down on the cow's enormous plastic udder. Mom wanted to throw it out. I told her it was just humor, Jessie style. I step into the steamy shower and let the warmth coax me awake. I shampoo, shave my legs, and let the conditioner sit in my hair for exactly 5 minutes, just as it says on the bottle. After toweling off, I put on deodorant, foot powder, perfume, and then begin applying wine-colored eyeliner under my lashes. Do boys have to go through this trouble day in and day out? How about Tomper Sandell, the football player who appears to be naturally cute with his shaggy blonde hair and cleft chin? Does he worry about how he smells? I put on extra eyeshadow in a semicircle around my top eyelid. According to Glamour magazine, this will give Oriental eyes a look of depth. I've always known that I don't have that neat crease at the top of my lid like my friends do that tells you exactly where the eyeshadow should stop. So every day I have to paint in that crease, but I don't think I'm fooling anybody. Hurry up, Ellen, Mom calls from downstairs. I throw on my new Ocean Pacific t-shirt and jeans and run down. Mom is standing in the kitchen, quietly spreading peanut butter on whole wheat bread. She turns to look at me and her eyebrows dip into a slight frown. Is that what you're wearing to school? Yes, Mom, I say. We go through this scene every year. What about all those good clothes we bought in Minneapolis? Those dresses are great, I say, but no one wears a dress on the first day of school. Oh, Mom says, as if she's not convinced. She turns to finish packing my lunch. As usual, Father has already left for the hospital, so he can get an early start on patients with morning empty, surgery-ready stomachs. Everyone is at the bus stop. The same faces from last year and the year before and the year before that, but my throat still constricts. I wish Jessie lived nearby so she could take the bus with me. Two of the hockey players, Brad Whitlock and Mike Anderson, are loudly hooting and swaggering as if they own the place. I slip back and try to become invisible. When the bus comes, student bodies swarm around the door like eager bees waiting to get into the hive. I let most of the kids go ahead of me, but as I board, somebody shoves me from behind. Hey, chink, move over. In the back of me is Brad Whitlock, a darkly adult look clouding his face. The sound of his words hangs for a moment in the cramped air of the school bus. Numbly, I look around. Everyone seems to be looking somewhere else. Out the window, at their books, just away. Brad pushes past me to the back of the bus, where he resumes guffawing with his friends. I sit gingerly in the nearest seat, like an old lady afraid of breaking something. I feel so ashamed, and I don't know why. And why Brad Whitlock, the popular guy who had never before even bothered to acknowledge my existence all these years at Arkin High? I keep my eyes fixed on the landscape and concentrate on keeping them dry. As soon as the bus doors open at school, I rush out without looking back. Once I join the tide of people flowing into the brick building, my heartbeat finally starts to settle. Now I feel protected, anonymous. Inside, excited voices unite in a single deafening roar, punctuated by the staccato of slamming locker doors. Hey, Ellen! Jessie's voice rises above the din. She will never know how glad I am to see her familiar face. Hi, Jess, I say, keeping a falsetto of cheerfulness on my voice. Are you okay? Jessie's big brown eyes study me closely. Then the pre-final bell rings. I'm fine, thanks, Jess. I slam our locker door, imagining that Brad Whitlock's fingers are caught in it. Maybe someday I'll stop to really think about it, about what it means to be different.
Okay, awesome. Ed, do you want to tell us a little bit about your book and give us a little reading, or?
Yes, absolutely. I don't know about elevator pitches. It's not safe to get on an elevator if there's a fire emergency. So anyway, the title itself is pretty much the log line, the description of the book. David Tung can't have a girlfriend until he gets into an Ivy League college. David is living in a New Jersey town, an upscale town called Shark Beach. where it is 80% Chinese descent. And the high school itself has an even higher percentage of Asians, about 90%. And the top 10 of the class rank are all within 0.25 of a point within each other. So it's extremely competitive. What marks David differently is that he doesn't attend the local Chinese school because his mother has a problem with the woman who runs it. So he goes to Chinese school in Manhattan. Um, he rides there with his father. His father goes there to pick up supplies for their restaurant. They run a Chinese restaurant within Shark Beach, so they are not one of the higher strata families there. But David moves from one predominantly Chinese environment into the other because in Manhattan's Chinatown, it's more of a working class kind of kids that he's interacting with. So I'm going to read this part. Even though he has been warned that he cannot date until he gets into an Ivy League college, he can, avoid girls and like not ask them out. But this girl asks him to a dance and he doesn't know what to do. So I'm going to read this excerpt. I think the only thing else you need to know is that Harmony Health is a local hospital system that he's applied for an internship with. Okay, here we go. My heart was pounding in fear when my mother picked me up as usual at the bus stop. I was full on terrified to lay out all my plans in full, which I needed to do to even have a shot at her giving me the tux money. How was school? She asked. Fine, I said. I saw her mouth twitch. She was suspicious when she didn't hear grades. No tests or quizzes? No, nothing today. What about Harmony Health? Still nothing. I couldn't muster the courage to bring up the dance. Once we got to the restaurant, I went into work mode. Every time I thought I was going to get a break for a few minutes, another task presented itself. Soon the night was almost over. We were cleaning up. It was now or never. I'd already decided there was no way I was going to tell my mother about the dance once we got home. She said numerous times that when she gets home, she just wants to sleep. Plus, here at the restaurant, there was always the chance I could rally up some backup support from Auntie Zong or my dad. At the very least, my mother would think twice before really lashing into me, if it came to that. My newly found level of social acceptance and the potential for a real life girlfriend was riding on being able to go to the dance. I could be as cool at Shark Beach High as I was at the Chinese school in Chinatown. But in order for that to happen, I needed to go to Nordstrom this week. There was no way to put it off any longer. Mom, I said hoarsely. She was stapling receipts near the cash register. Yes? Can you help me rent a tuxedo? Tuxedo? What for? I want to go to a school dance. She put down the stapler and curled her hands into fists. You want to go to a dance? My shoulders involuntarily shrugged out of fear. A girl asked me to go, and I said yes. A girl, said my mother, like a TV detective announcing she'd found the murder weapon. I heard my father moving somewhere behind me, possibly taking shelter. Who's this girl? Christina Tao. My mother flared her nostrils. Is she your secret girlfriend, David? No, I said. I don't have a girlfriend, much less a secret girlfriend. Tao, she said venomously. It sounds like a Cantonese name. My mother sometimes expressed distaste for Cantonese people for no explicable reason. How many times have I told you you're not allowed to have a girlfriend until college? You better get into an Ivy League school. It was the end of yet another long day of work, but my mother didn't seem tired at all. She was as mad as I've ever seen her. I know, I said. I looked around for some silent show of support. Auntie Zong's English wasn't great, but she could probably understand what was happening. Yet she was diligently wiping down a tabletop, her head bent. My father suddenly found that something in the kitchen required him. After a brief pause, my mother was on me again. You're not even number 1, are you? She pointed at my nose. All the way down at number 8. You spend too much time thinking about girls. That was a complete lie. It angered me into a fatal mistake, talking back to my mother while she was still fired up. I spent too much time working at this restaurant, I protested. You know how long I work here? How long your father works here? You want to run around with girls while we're spending day and night here making money so we can live? Oh no, don't let her start talking about money when she's this angry. Okay, look, I said, attempting to calm her down. It's just one dance. It's not a big deal. Christina's parents are Chinese too, and they think it's okay. But there was no calm eye to this storm. They're not your parents, and that's not my child. Why can't you understand? No, you don't understand. A lot of kids are going. Not you, David, my mother thundered. You tell this girl you don't want a girlfriend, and you don't want to talk to her anymore. I already told her I would go, I said. Tell her you can't. You're in school, and school's for learning, not for girls. She closed her lips and wiped her front teeth with her tongue, considering something. Give me your phone, David. What? Give me your phone. I don't want you talking and sexting with this girl. I'm not sexting with her, Mom. Who knows what you're doing? I handed over my phone, and half a second later, it was zipped up in her purse. Nothing ever escaped from there, not even light. Thank you.
Awesome. So I have to ask you both. I mean, I know that people always ask this, like how autobiographical are these books? Like, did you draw from your, like, I know Marie, you already said that you grew up in Minnesota, in a mostly white town,
In a
and
rural town, a very isolated rural town. And you grew up in New York City. Was your upbringing like much like David Tung's?
Oh, I actually I was born in New York, but I grew up in Jersey.
Right.
And my upbringing was, definitely overlapping with David's. David's a lot smarter and nicer than me. The Jersey that I grew up in was, not a real, like Asian dominated kind of society. It was like, God, maybe like 2 or 3%. But I pulled a lot of my experiences of going to college. I was lucky enough to get into Columbia University. And once I found myself in this environment of like a number of Asians, like a critical mass of Asians, like I thought like, oh, okay, now we're gonna do like all this cool Asian stuff together, and like, we're gonna like stand up for racial justice and everything. But it was like I was like this total hick, and like all these other Asians were like cool. They had like fake IDs, they had like all this fancy clothes and like tons of money apparently, and like they're hitting clubs and stuff and like looking cool, and I that is the experience that I kind of pulled back into the high school years for the fictional Shark Beach.
That's interesting.
I also want to mention for me too, I think one kind of interesting thing in having the book reissued is that there was enough interest that we had several publishers interested. And actually one of the sort of controversies was, well, there's no social media, like you should update the book and so forth. And so when I was thinking about whether I should do that, I ended up going with an editor who was older and who had always loved the book. And then I realized I had a reason for that because I'm a little older than Ed. And because my parents immigrated in 1953, they came here right after the Korean War. And when before 1965, when a lot of Asians came. So by the time I got to college, there were probably like 5 Asians there. So I am feeling like deliberately that I want this book also just to be sort of like a time capsule, because my experience and the experience of people at that time is very different. When there wasn't any Asian solidarity, there wasn't any idea of like Pan-Asian anything, because there weren't any Asians, like there weren't even any Korean groceries because there were no Korean immigrants. So that's why I was really glad to be able to keep it as a sort of, I don't want to say historical piece, but it is a piece of its time. And there are people who are doing wonderful contemporary things now, like Ed.
Yeah, I mean, that's really that's definitely interesting because I mean that's certainly how I grew up. Also, not in Minnesota, but I think it's very common for, especially for that period, for people to have been completely isolated, trying to assimilate because that's what they thought was the ticket to success. But then, like Ellen in your book, they encounter these sort of daily, little incidents of, not little, but or necessarily, they call them micro, but it's not necessarily micro as you feel it. But these sort of daily incidents of racism, but and she just kind of has to take it. She has no one really to talk to about it. And and then whereas like in Ed's book, there's like this whole community that they can kind of share things with. So it's just a whole different world. So yeah, and I do find it interesting, Ed, that you once you got to college, you're like, hey, this is great, and we can all be together and do things, have this whole Asian togetherness thing, but actually
We're going to bring Asian American studies to college.
Right. But then you found that it was a little bit more complicated than that. Yeah, and I'm wondering actually for you, Marie, when did it take you a while to find? Because I know now you co-founded the Asian American Writers Workshop. So it seems like you've sort of come into your Asian American identity. Did that take a while, given that you were so isolated at first?
Oh, definitely. And, to skip ahead a little bit to that, that's another incident of there's no group for us. So making the group was sort of like making the book as well. So when I got to college, about of the 5 other Asian, Korean American students, most of the people were, more 1.5 generation. So they did all this Korean stuff, because my parents were so assimilationist, we weren't allowed to eat kimchi. Like when a Korean grocery did open, we would go once a year, drive through all the Minnesota weather for 4.5 hours to see the one Korean family my parents knew, stop at the Korean grocery, get one tiny little thing kimchi. We were not allowed to eat. Only my dad ate it, and he didn't eat it when he was working. So by the time I got to college, I was still just recapitulating my friend group, who are all white people. And the Koreans are sort of you've never eaten kimchi? You don't know what this is? Do you know what blah, blah, my parents wouldn't let us learn to speak Korean. So I was just sort of a very weird anomaly, and I didn't feel comfortable with them either. So it was just kind of recapitulated my friend group. But my best friend in college was Vietnamese American. So, but we didn't talk about our identity all the time. And I remember, when I was trying to become a writer, that I thought, I was a big Flannery O'Connor fan. And I was like, so Flannery O'Connor's very universal. So I have to write all these Flannery O'Connor type stories. And they were very fluent, but they were just, they didn't live at all on the page. I did really badly in the one course that I took. And then so when I was working on Finding My Voice, I first made it. I actually had some fun in high school and had really good friends. So I wanted to make a book about that. And when I showed it to my boyfriend, who's not my husband, he's like, how come there's no Asian characters? Don't you want to have an Asian character in there? And I thought, no, why would I want to do that? I want it to be universal. I want it to be, so it's got to be all white people. There's the swimmer and the da-da-da. That's how YA works. And then he was kind of like, maybe you should try to have an Asian person. And then once I put the Asian person in there, it's stuff happened to her. You know what I'm saying? And then that's what became the book. But that's also what made it really hard to sell, because she's Asian, it's all white people, she encounters racism, there's some violence, and the editors just did not know what to do about that, because they didn't have any context. Publishing is a lot about, this is this book plus this book that was already out. That's how they sell the next book. So this was kind of it's not like The Good Earth or something. They can contextualize it.
That's interesting. That's funny. Yeah, I mean, because the thing is, if all you read when you grow up is books about white people, then you think, well, that's what I should write, So,
right. And then funny. So I didn't know other writers, and just after I dropped out of being pre-med, I still wanted to be a writer, but I didn't know what I was doing. And so I wanted to live in New York, but the only way I could afford it, and also to make my parents happy, is I was an investment banker, and they thought I was getting ready to go to Harvard Business School, but I was actually writing. And that's when, when I met the other people, and Ed actually was an early sort of OG of the Writers Workshop. When I met these other Asians, I think it was post-college, when it was more, I'm kind of this is this Pan-Asian. and New York was so different. There were a lot of Korean groceries then too. And it was just sort of starting to see where my place was. Because I also remember when we'd go to Korean groceries, like with my parents, I'd hear them screaming stuff at my parents. And then later when I could speak Korean, they were like, why don't your kids speak Korean? What's wrong with you? You're terrible Koreans. Finally, I could understand it. I was like, oh, that's what they've been saying all this time. Got it.
That's so funny. Wow. So
I'd like to point out the Asian American Writers Workshop turned 30 this year.
congratulations.
It's funny because
There
we're
you
all
go,
still like
Marie.
28. So how does that work that way?
How was that possible?
Right?
Wow. So I do have to ask, since I did have to note that even though both of your novels were completely different and sort of in different time periods, different issues, completely different contexts, but both of the protagonists wanted very badly to be doctors, and were both insistent that it wasn't just parental pressure. They both really, really wanted to be doctors themselves. And I was just wondering, how did you guys come about choosing these protagonists and, and deciding that this is how you wanted to write your story? And just like that from the beginning. And then also were you worried that this was like perpetuating a stereotype, or just wondering about your thoughts about that? So that, especially since neither of you actually became doctors, I was just wondering, how is that you both chose protagonists who wanted to be doctors?
Do you want to go, Ed?
Oh, sure. Well, David doesn't only want to be a doctor. He specifically wants to be someone who treats cancer.
Right.
And he's fascinated with the story of Steve Jobs. How Steve Jobs apparently had this cancer condition where he could be operated upon, but it later came back and killed him. But Steve Jobs to David kind of also represents this kind of like kind of brash kind of individual who really made a mark on society and operated with no restrictions whatever, and was able to pretty much clear his own path. And that's something that David kind of craves himself, because he has such a restricted life. He has like school, and then he has work at home, and then he has like Chinese school too. My editor on this book, Sun Young Lee, the great Sun Young Lee, it's so funny because we had very different upbringings. Like her parents were like academes, and our family didn't have a restaurant. We had a motel. That was like our family business. And I was like always at school or working, like David. And like after reading the book, one of her first comments was, he already has to go to school and then work at the family business. How can they still expect him to get all A's? And I was like, this is like the struggle of like so many second generation Asians who have to like deal with the family business and everything. I don't know. I never really had this idea of being a doctor, even though it was constantly impressed upon me by my parents. But it was like I still remember when I actually went to journalism graduate school. And as I was about to graduate, my mother said, "It's not too late for you to go to medical school." I said, "It's not too late for you to go either."
Perfect.
Boom.
I think for me, it was much more of a plot thing, because the book is called Finding My Voice, and it's about Ellen trying to find her voice, not just sort of apart from her parents and their expectations, but in the book, she has this kind of crazy older sister who's this study machine, gets all A's, just is doing her ergo all the time. She's already at Harvard, and she's going to be a doctor, and her boyfriend's going to be a doctor, and kind of already set in this sort of stereotypical like Asian, I'm going to be a doctor. And Ellen has this idea that she wants to be a doctor. So I kind of wanted, and like a plot, like a sub theme where Ellen decides on her own that she wants to be a doctor apart from her sister. And because it's been so difficult for her to be in her shadow, like on that first day of school, when she gets called a name, like everyone's like, oh, what happened to Michelle? Michelle's so smart. What'd she do? What are you up to? And she, even from that outset, she needs to figure out how she's different from her sister, but it may also mean following her or seeming to follow her into medicine. So she's not necessarily, finding her voice does not necessarily mean just completely like saying no to everything that's around her either.
Right. So it's sort of, it's finding her voice, but not burning everything down.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Not rejecting everything not rejecting her culture or her family.
You know, because she is Asian and it seems stereotypical that she wants to be a doctor, but she's also Ellen and she has her reasons that she wants to be a doctor. And in the sequel, I think she does question it a little more too.
Uh-huh. So yeah, can you tell us a little bit more about the sequel?
Sure. The sequel is called Saying Goodbye, and Ellen does go to Harvard, and this is the first time, because she's grown up in such a white environment, she meets other people of color, and her roommate is Black, and she's kind of trying to negotiate that, and she ends up getting a Korean boyfriend, and then the LA riots happen, and then kind of in the intersection of all that, she's kind of trying to figure out what side she's on, kind of not understanding things about like intersectionality, and so that's kind of the big plot. So
I was wondering, so Ed, about your world that you describe, it has so many different groups in it. And I was wondering if you could just sort of describe a little bit about like the different kinds of groups that populate your book.
Well, at Shark Beach High, there are like the grinders, the kids who just study all the time, and they have private tutors, and they're like concentrated in like the top 3 slots of the class. There are also the kids who, because both their parents are tied up in their professional careers, they're at home alone in their LEED certified designer homes, and they just have parties and stuff. I mean, they're still getting A's in school, but they are like sort of the cut up kids, they know the combination of the liquor cabinet and everything, and they know their way around drinks. They'll like sneak a flask into class and stuff. Then there are the jock kind of kids. What comes to mind immediately is this guy, Ted Cito, who seems to be like running for president already, but is generally well-liked football guy who apparently is being recruited by Harvard. He's David's locker mate. And they're forced together even though they're in different grades, because the school is constantly being renovated because the town decided to slash property taxes in order to get more people to move in to please the developers who are building more and more mansions using reclaimed brick from the brick industry that Shark Beach historically was. Yes, I've created this whole world.
That's great.
In the Chinatown school, David is like one of the cooler kids. Like they go out onto the fire escape during snack time and smoke and do what bad-ish kids kind of do. I just wanted it to be like, I didn't want to give any room to like to white racism in this book. I wanted it to be like, okay, we have our own issues with each other, and I wanted it to kind of focus on that and like just talk about us.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly, it's interesting how there's just I mean, there's just as much friction among those groups as there are among, different racial groups. It's interesting to read that.
And David doesn't know how to process it yet. Like he's like, Cantonese, why do you have a problem with Cantonese people? But like, and then there's also like a slight allusion to like the status of Taiwan and Hong Kong, and like that's something the adults grapple with that the kids kind of filter through in their own way.
Right. It's interesting. So I was wondering, if you could tell us what you're working on now. Like, are you both working on YA, or are you moving on to different genres?
So I actually have a novel, a literary novel coming out with Simon & Schuster in May called The Evening Hero. And that's an adult novel that has to do with North Korea and South Korea and the Korean War, bioterror, rural hospital closures. So it's very adult, I guess. But I'm still working on YA, and I recently, I have a forthcoming novel that's finished called Hurt You, and it is a Korean American retelling of Mice and Men, about a girl who has a non-neurotypical sibling, and they're new to a very Asian town. So kind of similar to Ed's. It's actually also it's a Korean American centered. I don't even know. I guess there's a few white characters in it, but it's about like in A Mice and Men, there's a bunkhouse where they'll hang out, and here it's the Korean Hagwon, kind of the study center, which is part of this hair salon that some of the immigrants run. And so similarly, I wanted to have something that we see as white to be completely Korean, and they're just eating Korean snacks and doing the weird Korean thing. And there's some there's some undocumented immigrants, and just sort of that kind of texture of life in a YA book. That's just that it's such a similar urge to like what's in Ed's book, that it's just centered in a totally different way. And I think probably for me, given the way I grew up, I was kind of excited to just do something more that's really different.
That sounds awesome. How about you, Ed?
Oh, well, I have a mystery series set in Taipei, and there have been 3 books in the series so far, and the 4th one should be out next year, hopefully next year. The coronavirus has just completely washed the schedule, so. But I like having a steady mystery series to have to keep my mind regular.
We have a question. Can you please repeat the name of your Korean of Mice and Men book?
Oh, it's called Hurt You, as in hurt, H-U-R-T, Hurt You. And thank you for asking about it, because actually there's one more thing that I wanted to mention, is that besides having trouble selling Finding My Voice, I've had trouble selling every single one of my books. And the big objection has been, you always have some random violent thing that happens. Like, violence doesn't happen to Asians. You're all doctors. You're sitting in your doctor's offices studying. Like, where does this come from? And I just felt like, no, there's like, I experienced so much violence when I was growing, like physical violence, that I kind of also feel like this is going to be part of, these characters. So Hurt You, for all of you who've read Of Mice and Men, it has a very depressing, extremely violent, but then also banal ending. And so a bunch of publishers are interested, but everyone's like, you can't do this. It's too violent. And I just thought, I'm not a violent person. I'm personally not a violent person. Artistically, it's just, maybe I'll kill one less person, but it just became this, no, they can't have like a bake sale and one person mean to the other person. It's got to go. So I'm a little bit not worried, but I'm feeling like, well, I'm going to own this. This is how I wanted it to be. This is not how I was advised that it should end. And so it's just going to be a really interesting experiment for me. Everyone just says, in YA, there are rules. You can't do this, you can't do that. And I just thought, you know what? Sorry, this is just how it's going to be. So thank you for asking that, because then it helped me remember this comment that I wanted to make.
I was going to ask if you both feel like, you've both published multiple books, and I was wondering if you feel like you've already kind of mentioned, Marie, that it's been hard to publish your books. Do you feel, have you felt like a lot of that is because they're Asian books, or because people just didn't know what to do with them, or?
I think publishing is already really difficult.
Right.
And, everybody wants things that are original, but everyone wants something that you can be like, well, it's a combination of Jaws And now it's Crazy Rich Asians. It's the Crazy Rich Asians with Jaws. You know what I'm saying? Like they always need this contextualism. And then just the way I write, I always end up writing something kind of out there, and it's a little, but then I kind of feel like this is what I do. And it's a little frightening because even with this book that's coming out, and it's been under contract since 2012. It's been under contract now for like almost 10 years.
Wow.
Part of it is we just did not, like editorially, we just had a lot of trouble. And then the other very weird thing is, you know, my agent loved the book. Only they had one person, it was like the last publisher wanted it. And then oddly enough, Anthony Bourdain wanted it for his series. And it was just so interesting because he does mostly cookbooks, as you know, but he was really into the immigrant story, and it was very flattering. But just every single time it's been it's like if this last publisher doesn't take it, that's it, kind of precipice for everything. And luckily we've always squeaked by. I mean, even we have a pile of rejections from really, really small presses like Soft Skull Press. Like I'm getting these rejections from these tiny presses, and just no, every single time, you know, and I worked before that, you know, probably about, you know, 8 years on the book. Like I actually took a whole year off, like actually going to medical school, like, you know, going around these hospitals and stuff. Do you see what I'm saying? Like it's kind of, I mean, this is what we do, but then when it comes down to the precipice of is it going to sell, you really do question yourself, like, did I just spend 8 years on this where it might end up, and I do have 2 other books that are in a drawer that I've never sold. So it does happen.
Sadly.
Well, you know, publishing is never easy, and even the small presses like Soft Skull are like overwhelmed with submissions,
Right.
like thousands, you know. And
every day I feel like, you know how it's over the transom. I think if we had transoms now, it would just become pouring in, but instead everyone just emails it now.
Right.
So you can't really see. It's not physically like filling up like the or whatever.
There's not even the barrier of having to type it anymore because it's just
I just press send.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
well,
it's true.
You know, it's definitely easier with mysteries, particularly you know, I'm with Soho Crime, and like they only do series, so it's like, well, you put out the first book, you gotta do the sequels, right?
And the mysteries are great.
uh
And there's food and action.
Yeah, we have a request to hear more about the mystery novels.
Would like to
Ed?
hear more about the mystery novels. Well, the current series, I have an older series that's set in Manhattan's Chinatown in 1976, the Robert Chow books. There's 3 of those. First book was actually published by Kaya, which published David Tung last year. And the editor on that was also Sun Young Lee. She also edited my first book, Waylaid, and published that as well. Sun Young is amazing. She has been like the sun and the water and the wind to germinate my flowers, aka my books. Okay. So let me talk about the mystery novels since you want to hear about them. The central character is this guy, Jingnan, who runs a food stand at the Shilin night market in Taipei. And he always gets dragged into these things. He's not like, you know, a professional detective at all or anything, but he works at the nightstand, the night market stall, with various miscreants of Taiwanese society. And so they go out and they try to, you know, do whatever to do what's right and try to fix stuff in the end. But it's also my opportunity to talk about the history and culture of Taiwan, and to actually reflect a bit about American culture and Asian Americans, you know, because when Taiwanese Americans go to Taiwan, they're Americans. They're not, you know, our, you know, Taiwanese brethren. They're Americans, you know. They're just like completely rude. And there's this infamous video of this Taiwanese American guy who was angry at the bus driver because he thought he skipped a stop that he had indicated he wanted to stop at, and he was up there yelling at the guy, just saying, "I'm gonna kill you, man," everything. And then this one stop, the door opens and people on the bus rise up and push this guy out the door. And it's pretty awesome.
The collective
Right.
action.
Yeah, they're like, get this American guy out of here.
That's great. I was wondering if, is it difficult to find good editors? Somebody's asking. Catherine is asking.
I think if you have a good agent, they help you find good editors.
Because only a good editor would want our books.
Of course.
Only the best.
And I wonder if anybody else wants to ask a question. You're welcome to unmute yourself and ask if you like, or put your question in the chat. I was also wondering, since we did just have this episode in our middle school where somebody, where an Asian girl was spat on, just wondering if you had any words that you wanted to say to this girl, or if she watches this recording, or to her classmates, given, I don't know, especially given that you have been writing and thinking about Asian teens lately.
Wow. It's just making me sad thinking about it again. So I would say totally, I'm so sorry. And the only other thing I would say is that I think for me in high school, because stuff like that happens so much and so frequently and so randomly, the randomness of it, and I don't know if it was the same for her, the randomness is what is so shocking and traumatizing, that if I didn't have my friends who stood with me and also helped me not minimize it, I think I would have had a very different, much worse, debilitating high school experience. So a lot of it is having other people who would sort of reify what had happened, and not, because my experience also being the only person was just always like, oh no, this didn't happen. It wasn't as bad, or the person was just kidding. That I am just kidding was a big thing that people would say when they were being violent and otherwise, or you're so sensitive, or it had nothing to do with race. My new threshold is, if something violent happens to an Asian person, that is anti-Asian racism, because the person is Asian. So.
Yeah, I mean, that was one thing in your book, is that she did have, she did have this circle of friends who always, lifted her up and told her that this was a big deal and she shouldn't just shrug it off, which I think it is, very common especially for Asians who are isolated and assimilated. Whenever something happens to them, they think, oh, well, maybe it's just me,
Right. And even,
right, maybe this was just personal against me. There's something I did wrong or something.
Even with my colleagues here, in New York, where it's like so, tolerant and so forth. So my my colleague here, May Nye, when she was out, somebody like body slammed her when you were walking. She just like slammed into her, and it's kind of an easily like, oh, it was a mistake or whatever. Except in New York, people are so used to, like staying out each other's way. Like that was so pretty obvious. So she actually ended up like reporting it and going on TV to talk about it. And what was interesting, so I was posting all this on Facebook, like, look what happened to May. And then I had 3 other colleagues say, that happened to me. But all of them were just like, oh, they didn't really think of it in those terms. They were attacked. A lot of times the police won't, like, they have such a long threshold. Like, they have to use a slur and it has to be on video and they have to say the slur, like, clearly into the camera. Like, they have all these really dumb standards. So May herself she labels this an anti-Asian attack or anti-Asian hate. She doesn't even try to label it as like a hate crime, because that's become so technical. So I think more among us, where we really are trying to recontextualize it, that she was attacked, she's Asian, and you don't have to have this video where the guy's like, I hate Asians. That's why I body slammed her, because that's too much. It's not on me if I'm attacked. It's on the fact that I got attacked by somebody. And I really think as a community of all people, that is how we need to stand up and call this stuff out.
I think it's also policed like a NHL playoff game, you know, no blood, no foul. Like, well, you're fine. You know?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
She was physically
Yeah.
attacked. Being spit on is completely, it's like a biological attack. Like that is an attack.
Right.
So frankly, I don't understand like why the student who did it wouldn't, you know, have some legal sanctions because it's assault.
Well, they're a minor, right?
They're a minor, okay.
Yeah.
But it's still a biological assault.
Right. It
You
is
see
an
what I'm saying?
assault.
So it's not like, oh, they were playing or they're just kidding or kids bully each other. That was an assault.
Right. Yeah, it's considered assault and battery.
Well, I would say to this girl, you know, this incident is not going to stop you from doing what you want to do, from being what you want to be. The shame is on the other side, and you will prevail. And please, if you haven't already, watch the Linda Lindas singing Racist, Sexist Boy. And I hope that gives you strength.
Thank you for that. So, yeah, I mean, I think that if we can all share our experiences and validate each other, I think that's very helpful. Because I think that, you know, just if we're isolated and we don't share our experiences, then it's easy for us to minimize them.
And I really think I wrote Finding My Voice not just for other Asians. I really wrote it for people who might be bullies or just everybody. One thing that I found like kind of heartening and kind of not is when it first came out, I got lots of mail from my high school classmates or just my middle school classmates and my elementary school classmates going, oh, like first it would either be like, I didn't realize you would get so upset. Like I was just kidding. Like, why would that be so upsetting? Or I would get all these emails going, oh, you know, the bully, a lot of the bullies are like these composites because I had so many bullies. I had to kind of make a composite. And they'd be like, yeah, and I know that bully you're talking about is Katie McCabe. That's the bully. And it, you know what I mean? It would be my other bully calling the other bully a bully and stuff. And then people would say like, oh, that's so sweet. Did you reconcile? And I said, nope. I never wrote them back. I appreciated it, threw the letter away, and I thought, well, at least they're reading it. But I don't have to be friends with them now.
Well, you obviously made some kind of impact on them, so that you got through to them in some way.
I did write the book for them, yes, because maybe they will at least think about it a little more next time.
And they read it.
Exactly. So that made me kind of happy. I hope they spent money on it.
Yeah. You got money from them.
Yeah.
No, what they say, you know, that fiction is fiction creates empathy in people, right? So if they read that, they develop some kind of empathy for your character, you know.
I do think so. And I think
Yeah.
so much of it is, you know, when Ed was talking about the Linda Lindas and racist, sexist boy, it was, oh, well, my dad told me to stay away from Chinese people. So he's getting it from his dad, you know, this guy. So I also feel like, well, maybe I hope the people who read my book before will be better parents, because this is kind of how it also gets passed down, because you learn that from your parents.
I'm just showing this cloth edition of Finding My Voice with the Edward Hopper-ish image, right? Great.
That was one of my favorite ones. It's a very strange, slightly disturbing, really cool image. That was the first edition. So, and then of course the current one is like, right, it's like, the middle one was like, she's in a leotard doing gymnastics. So it's the same person, different artists, different publishers.
Different light.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I have to say, I love the gymnastics part of it, where it's like, it's the same kind of sort of hostility, but sort of barely justifiable, you know, from the gymnastics teacher, with a gymnastics coach, where it's like, well, you know, I gave your letters to somebody else because of some made up reason. You know, it's not because you're, you know, since she's not, you can't like really say this is because she's Asian, but you know, it's just not fair. So that's just the way, you know, so much of this happens.
Right.
Right. So someone is saying, I've seen videos of Black grade schoolers arrested for silly misdemeanors. Not saying I want this girl arrested, but it just seems when it is a white girl attacking, it's less serious somehow. Yeah.
I agree. And
Definitely.
I don't agree that, I don't think there should be like legal, I might have misspoken. I don't think the police should come in and arrest children. But at the same time, we do need to classify this what it is. It is an actual assault.
There should be consequences.
Correct.
This is what you know, what we've been trying to say is that it's not okay to just say this is not acceptable and then not do anything, because then you are accepting it. So
Isn't it also minimalized because it's like two girls having a thing instead of?
We
like,
don't know if it's two girls actually. We don't know that the gender is of the person who did it, but yeah, but yeah. I mean, and it's hard not to say, you know, if it was different races of people, that it would the response would be different.
Right. Because we can't see what the alternative would be.
Yeah.
So we have to just do what we can.
Yeah. So, are there any other questions from people, or is there anything else you guys want to say before we let everybody?
Any
Go to
college
bed or put the
admissions
kids to bed?
tips?
College admission. I think they should read your books, because both of the characters did really well.
Oh my God! You know, when I read Marie's book, and you know, she goes on these college tours, I was like, that's how I really blew it, because I didn't visit colleges. You know, I didn't show my heightened interest in visiting the campus and meeting, you know, going on the tour and meeting the admissions officer representatives or whatever. I
Hey,
didn't
do you
do
think
any
I
of
went
that,
to?
and I was
You
like,
think I did that? My father's a psychologist.
well, your character showed me how.
Yes, my character did.
How I did not make those hurdles.
My parents had to drive me an hour to a different town so I could take my SAT. And there was only one other guy from my class who was really dumb. So he got 500 and I got like 600. So I thought I was so smart. Yikes. Yeah. I didn't do as well as Ellen. But I did want to say, really, really appreciate that everybody here is taking the time to come and listen to this. And so I'm really touched, because your time is precious and everyone's probably doing so much Zoom and everyone's so busy. And I do think this is just kind of a step to understanding things better, that people will actually take the time to listen. So.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm very glad for everyone coming, and especially to the really introverted sorts who are going to watch this on recorded video because they were too shy to enter the Zoom room.
Or they were going to, or they had to put their kids to bed, or so.
Or they had to put their kids.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah,
I am going to say, somebody asked, are the books appropriate for middle schoolers? I would say so. Yes.
They're 12 and up.
Yeah. So absolutely. My middle schooler read them and enjoyed them both. So, all right. So, well, thank you both so much for coming and spending your time with us, and for writing these wonderful books and building up Asian American YA literature, which is so in need of people like you and your books. So thank you very much. It's always great to see you guys.
Oh, thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Everybody. Take care.
Okay. Good night, everybody. Thank you so much.